Betrayal cuts the deepest when it comes from the person you trust most. This is the story of Claire, a devoted wife and mother who sacrificed everything for her family, only to be stripped of it all by the man she once called her husband. He thought he had destroyed her, but what he didn't know was that the same betrayal would awaken a strength he could never match. Stay with us until the end, because the way karma finds its way back to him will leave you stunned. And if you believe in powerful stories of resilience, redemption, and justice, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. From the sidewalk, Claire's house looked like a magazine spread. White picket fence, a maple tree pouring honey-colored shade over the lawn, window boxes spilling geraniums like laughter. Neighbors waved when she watered the flowers, and she always waved back, a gentle choreography of a life that appeared to be going exactly as planned. Inside, mornings were a small symphony. Lunchboxes clicked shut, cartoon theme songs hummed from the living room, and the scent of cinnamon toast braided through the air. Claire moved through it all with practiced grace, tying shoelaces while reciting spelling words, packing a science project without crushing the tissue paper volcano. Mark liked to leave in a swirl, espresso in one hand, blazer shrugged on with the other. A kiss dropped on Claire's hairline, as if affection were punctual and could be checked off before 8 a.m. He was a natural, people said, a deal-maker, a charmer, the sort of man who called waiters by name after hearing it once and somehow remembered the birthdays of clients' children. To the world, he was the sunbeam in every room. To Claire, he was the dream she had folded her life around. She hadn't always been this domesticated version of herself. Before the babies, before Mark's promotions, Claire designed brand identities at a small agency downtown. She used to stay up late sketching, fingers smudged with pencil dust, unscrewing the cap of her favorite black pen as if it were a key to some brighter city. But when childcare costs outran her paycheck and Mark's career hit its fast climb, the math wrote a simple sentence. She would step back, he would surge forward. "It's just for a few years," he'd promised, cupping her jaw. "Then we'll build the agency you really want." The first time she noticed the change, it was tiny, a scent that did not live in their house. She hugged him in the doorway and something floral clung to his collar, faint and unfamiliar. Another day, a receipt from a wine bar she'd never been to, tucked into his pocket like a secret. He worked late more often, came home with a new screen lock on his phone. When she asked, careful, because marriage is a tightrope, he laughed as though she'd told an absurd joke. "You're adorable when you're jealous," he said, and kissed the worry off her forehead as if it were a smudge of mascara. Weeks grew thin with absence. He stopped lingering over the kids' bedtime stories. He stopped asking about the mock-ups she made for a friend's bakery rebrand. The more she tried to be easy, to be light, the more he floated away. And yet, on Sundays, he sat at the head of the table carving roast chicken, telling the children how proud he was of their spelling tests, telling Claire how lucky he was. The lies were not loud. They were soft, embroidered into ordinary days. One Friday night after a school fundraiser, Claire watched him from across the gym as fairy lights glowed in a net of basketball hoops. Mark stood too close to a woman in a cobalt dress. They leaned toward each other in that private way people do when they forget the world has eyes. Claire held her paper cup so tightly it pleated. She told herself there was nothing to see. She told herself her life was not a glass that could shatter from one small sound. But the sounds accumulated, hushed calls that ended when she entered the room, calendar blocks labeled client dinner that turned into midnight returns, his tie crooked in a way that wasn't work, a credit card charge for a hotel conference in their own city. She did not want to be the wife who snooped. She did not want to be a detective in her own home, yet the not knowing was a slow drowning. On a rainy Tuesday, she asked him to sit. The children were coloring in the next room, a green sun rising in a purple sky. "Mark," she said, steady as a ruler. "Are you seeing someone?" He looked at her with a flat patience that frightened her more than anger would have. He took a breath and exhaled it like steam leaving a room. "Claire," he said, "I'm tired of pretending." A soundless collapse opened in her chest. "So it's true," she whispered. "He didn't bother with the performance." "Yes." He stood, pacing the rug, the same rug they'd chosen on a July afternoon when the children were toddlers, and everything felt like the beginning of something bright. "This us, it's stale. I've carried this family for years. I need more." She thought of the night feeds, the ear infections, the calendar she kept with color-coded lives, the way she'd learned to stretch one income into 5 different needs. She thought of the agency job she had laid down like a bouquet on the altar of their shared future. "More," she repeated, choking on the word. "From who?" He named her, the woman in cobalt. The name pinged off the walls, ridiculous and real at once. "Mark, we can fix this," Claire said, the automatic generosity of a person who has built her life around forgiveness. "We can go to counseling. The kids—" He cut a hand through the air. "I've spoken to a lawyer." The sentence rang like a gavel. He told her the house, the savings, the car, everything important was structured in his name for tax purposes. He had prepared. He had primed the story he would tell, that she was unstable, that she spent too much, that this separation was inevitable and civilized and absolutely her fault. "You won't get a penny," he said calmly, as if reading from the weather report, "but I'll make sure you're comfortable." The word comfortable fell like an insult. Claire stood so still, the room seemed to move around her. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had buttoned tiny coats and iced birthday cupcakes at midnight and typed freelance proposals to keep the lights on when his bonus hit late. Hands that had believed if they only worked harder, love would be safe. Rain knocked at the windows like impatient knuckles. In the next room, a crayon rolled off the table and hit the floor with a small, cheerful clack. Claire inhaled once, twice, and found the edge of her voice. "You're taking everything," she said. He smiled with a pitying softness that made her want to scream. "You'll land on your feet, you always do." He picked up his keys, already turning away, already halfway to a life where she did not exist, except as an inconvenience. The door closed behind him with an easy click. Claire pressed her palms to the cool kitchen counter and felt her body tremble. The map of her life had been torn in two. She could not see a road forward. She could not see at all, and yet, somewhere beneath the noise of fear, something small and stubborn stirred. Morning did not arrive. It dragged itself in, grey and reluctant, like a guest who didn't want to be there either. Claire woke on the couch, because the bed felt too official for a life that had come undone. The living room was a mess of unfolded blankets and yesterday's mail. She stood, joints clicking like old piano keys, and moved through the choreography she still knew. Cereal bowls, hair part, lunchbox zipper, a joke to make the kids smile and believe in ordinary. She did not mention the silence in the hallway, where Mark's footsteps used to be the metronome of their days. The paperwork came like weather, impartial, inevitable. A man in a blazer served her with the first stack, and then there were phone calls that used words like equitable distribution in tones that meant the opposite. The lawyer she could afford wore kindness like a scarf, present, but not a shield, and explained that the assets were arranged as neatly as a trap, titles in Mark's name. Accounts structured for efficiency, a prenup she had signed at 24 because love had seemed louder than ink. "We will fight," the lawyer said gently, "but you should prepare yourself." Preparation looked like packing. She boxed up the life that had once required a moving truck into a handful of cardboard squares, labeled in black marker. Kitchen, toys, books, bath. The house echoed in a new way as she peeled their family photos from the stairwell wall. the paint remembering each frame in a ghostly rectangle. Her daughter asked, "Are we playing a moving game?" And Claire smiled like a stage light flickering. "Yes, baby." A new adventure. The apartment she found was not tragic, which almost made it worse. It was the kind of place you pass on the way to somewhere else. 2 small bedrooms, a living room with a window that framed a slice of sky, and the fire escape like graph paper. She scrubbed it as if she could make square footage grow with bleach. The first night, the radiator hissed like an animal. The kids claimed their corners with stuffed friends and posters hung by washi tape. Claire sat on the floor in the kitchen, back against a cabinet, and told herself that survival often looked like this: a body breathing, a clock moving, a heart that refused to concede. Bills learned her new address quickly. They stacked themselves, smirking. She found part-time work taking on design gigs that paid in gratitude and late checks. A bakery logo here, a babysitter's flyer there, a cafe menu that had to be finished by midnight. She remembered her old software like one remembers a language learned in childhood. The muscle memory came back with every hotkey. She printed invoices, then watched as clients promised payment next week. A slippery country where nothing lived except excuses. On Sundays, she stretched groceries with the precision of a surgeon. Rice swelled into comfort. Carrots became soup that tasted like patience. The children learned the new budget in ways she never said aloud, asking for library trips instead of toy stores, turning off lights like it was a game with points. Claire hid past due notices in a shoebox under the sink and paid what she could, when she could, to whomever shouted the loudest. Shame was a coin that bought nothing and cost everything. Mark's life unfurled on screens, whether she sought it or not. The algorithm had memorized her pain. Photos of a rooftop bar, a hand with painted nails on his shoulder, the caption, "New Chapters." He wore the watch she'd given him the year their son learned to ride a bike. He posed in a car that looked like a spaceship, hashtags orbiting him. Just gratitude. Winning. Blessed. Claire scrolled until the room tilted and then set the phone face down like a hot pan. At night, after teeth were brushed and bedtime stories stitched a temporary peace across the day, she took out her laptop. The apartment softened around her into a hum of old pipes and neighbor laughter. She tried to remember the version of herself who once believed design could turn chaos into clarity. She sketched letter forms until they behaved, drafted brand palettes that made even cheap paper look expensive, stitched mood boards like quilts. Sometimes the work lit a candle inside her. More often, it felt like pushing a boulder up a sticky hill. There were setbacks that had nothing to do with money. The school called because her son had forgotten his permission slip. The sitter cancelled minutes before a client Zoom. A fever climbed her daughter's forehead at 2 a.m., and there was only one adult to hold the bowl. To read the label on the medicine twice, to stay awake and be a lighthouse. She did it all, and then went to work with the kind of headache that makes light feel sharp. Still, small victories arrived like shy birds. An old colleague emailed a referral. The bakery owner cried when she saw her new logo stitched on aprons, and told Claire that customers had started taking photos of the pastry case. A local yoga studio paid on time and in full. Claire put $20 bills into a jar labeled Someday, and then, when the car battery died, she fed the jar back into the machine of necessity. The loop was exhausting and holy. Try, fall, try again. Loneliness threaded through everything, even the bright parts like the seam inside a dress. She missed having another adult in the house to say, "Did you see that?" when the kids did something small and astonishing. She missed being able to put her back against someone else's bones and borrow their warmth. But missing did not cancel doing. She kept moving because the children's futures had eyes. On a Wednesday, colored the brown of old coffee, she spotted a paper taped to the community center door while dragging a wagon of laundry. Small business mixer. Thursday, 7 p.m. Free admission. Meet mentors. Build connections. The flyer was printed in Comic Sans, which felt like a dare. She laughed, one quick syllable that sounded almost like the person she used to be. Then the logistics began screaming. The sitter. The bedtime? The cost of an Uber. The voice in her head that said, "You don't belong in rooms like that anymore. Not with your thrift store blazer and your business cards printed at home." All afternoon she debated, flipping the flyer over in her mind like a coin that could rewrite a day. By evening, she'd talked herself into staying home twice and out of it 3 times. At 6:42, she texted the neighbor's college-age daughter and begged for a last-minute hour and a half. At 6:51, she pulled on the blazer with the invisible mend at the elbow and a pair of shoes that reminded her of a life when she spent more time walking into possibilities than out of emergencies. She kissed the kids goodnight at the door, whispering promises of pancakes in the morning. On the sidewalk, the city smelled like rain, even though the sky held. She stood under the community center's buzzing light, palm slick around the strap of her bag. She almost turned back, and then someone laughed inside, a bright, generous sound, and Claire, heart knocking, opened the door. The community center gym buzzed with polite laughter and the shuffle of business cards. Folding tables draped in plastic cloths lined the walls, each with a modest banner: local print shop, accounting help, insurance solutions. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing everything in a tired glow. Claire almost turned around the second she walked in. She felt like an imposter in her patched blazer, clutching homemade cards that looked flimsy compared to the glossy rectangles stacked neatly on every table. She lingered by the doorway, heart pounding, telling herself she could just slip out. No one would notice. That's when a woman in her 50s, with cropped silver hair and an energy that filled the room like sunlight, spotted her. She walked over with a warm, confident stride. "First time?" the woman asked, eyes kind but sharp enough to see through Claire's practiced smile. "Yes," Claire admitted, adjusting the strap of her bag. The woman extended her hand. "Julia, and you are?" "Claire." Julia tilted her head, studying her the way a teacher studies a student who hasn't realized her own potential yet. "What do you do, Claire?" The question made Claire hesitate. She could say, "I used to be a designer," but that sounded like a ghost speaking. She could say, "I'm a mom," but that didn't belong in this room where people measured each other by invoices and revenue. Finally, she straightened her shoulders. "I'm a brand designer. I help small businesses find their voice." Julia's smile widened. "Good answer. Now tell me why I should hire you instead of one of the agencies downtown." Claire froze, words tangling in her throat. She wanted to say, "Because I need this, because I'm trying not to drown, because I won't take your trust for granted." But Julia waited patiently, arms crossed, challenging without cruelty. Claire drew a shaky breath and said, "Because I know what it means to build something from scratch. I understand what it feels like to risk everything for a dream. I don't just design logos, I tell stories. And stories make people remember." Julia nodded slowly, her expression softening into approval. Then she leaned closer and said 6 words that would echo in Claire's memory for years. "You've already survived worse than failure." The sentence landed in her chest like a seed breaking open. Over the next hour, Julia introduced Claire to 3 business owners. She didn't pitch for her. She simply stood nearby, a silent endorsement while Claire described her ideas. Her voice wobbled at first but grew steadier with each conversation. By the end of the night, Claire had exchanged a dozen cards. 2 people asked her to follow up. For the first time in months, she walked home with a pulse of possibility instead of dread. The following week, she met Julia for coffee. Julia owned a small but successful marketing firm and offered mentorship, not charity. "You have talent," she said, tapping one of Claire's sketches. "But talent is only half the job. The other half is grit. Lucky for you, I think you've got plenty." With Julia's guidance, Claire polished her portfolio, raised her rates slightly, terrifying but necessary, and learned how to pitch with confidence instead of apology. She landed her first steady client, a family-owned cafe downtown. Designing their menus and signage reminded her why she had once loved this work. When the cafe owner sent photos of customers snapping pictures of the chalkboard wall she had designed, Claire felt a spark she thought had died forever. Meanwhile, Mark's carefully curated life began to show subtle cracks. Claire noticed it in the photos that surfaced on social media. The vacations grew less extravagant, the captions more defensive. His mistress no longer appeared in every picture. She smiled at that observation, though she quickly forced herself to refocus. His unraveling wasn't her concern, not yet. Her evenings changed. Instead of staring at overdue bills, she stayed up late sketching logos, playing with typography, and sending proposals. She still struggled. Money was scarce, exhaustion constant, but each small win stacked upon the last. She started to believe she could climb out of the crater Mark had left her in. One night, after the kids were asleep, she sat at her kitchen table, laptop glowing. She ran her fingers over a finished project, a bakery rebrand that made her client cry tears of joy. Claire whispered to herself, "I'm not done. I'm just beginning." It wasn't victory, not yet. But it was momentum, fragile and precious. And while Claire was busy rebuilding her life from ashes, Mark was busy feeding a fire he could no longer control. His investments, rushed, reckless, ego-driven, were starting to collapse under their own weight. The empire he'd built on her sacrifices was wobbling like a tower of glass. The shift was gradual, almost invisible at first, like the way dawn slides into morning without anyone noticing the exact moment light replaces dark. Claire's life, once reduced to scraps and survival, began knitting itself into something stronger. Her design business, nurtured with midnight coffee and Julia's mentorship, started to bloom. She rented a tiny co-working space above a florist shop, its windows fogged with the smell of roses and soil. For Claire, it felt like a palace. She set up her second-hand desk, a corkboard filled with inspiration, and a pot of bright yellow daisies her daughter had insisted on. Each morning she unlocked the door with reverence. It wasn't just an office. It was proof that she had a future. Clients multiplied, one referral birthing another. The cafe led to a yoga studio, which led to a boutique, then a non-profit. Claire's designs began appearing across the city. Menus, signs, websites, and flyers bearing her fingerprints of style. People started asking not just for work, but for her. They trusted her. They saw her as capable, reliable, creative, and her children saw it too. They no longer whispered about Daddy's new house when they saw her bent over the laptop. Instead, they bragged to their friends, "Mom made that logo." She hung their drawings on the office wall, right beside her clients' projects. To her, they carried equal weight, creations born from persistence. Money remained tight, but for the first time, it stretched. She paid rent on time. Groceries no longer required mathematical acrobatics. She even replaced the broken toaster, a luxury that felt like a trophy. Each small victory was a brick in the foundation she was rebuilding. But while Claire's star rose, Mark's life began to unravel. At first, it was whispers Julia overheard at networking events. "He's over-leveraged." His partner pulled out. That deal was smoke and mirrors. The man who once strutted through life with champagne confidence was making mistakes born of arrogance. Mark had tried to impress his mistress with extravagance. Private dinners, luxury vacations, a car that gleamed like a jewel. But debts mounted faster than income. Clients soured, contracts fell through. His smile in photos grew tighter, more forced. The captions shifted from winning to new beginnings, coded language for failure. Claire didn't seek out this knowledge, but it arrived anyway. Mutual acquaintances hinted, almost gleeful, about his stumbles. She listened quietly, offering nothing, her face neutral. Inside, she felt a storm of emotions. Satisfaction, disbelief, even a trace of sorrow for the man she had once loved. But mostly, she felt distance. His chaos no longer dictated her days. Then one evening, as she was reviewing mock-ups for a non-profit's annual campaign, her phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. She almost ignored it until she heard the voice. "Claire." Her stomach tightened. "Mark." For a moment she couldn't speak. Memories surged. The night he told her she'd have nothing, the way the door clicked shut behind him. She forced her voice into calm neutrality. "What do you want?" His tone was not the confident baritone she remembered. It was strained, fragile. "I need some help. Just a little. A loan, maybe. I'll pay you back." Claire sat back in her chair, stunned. The audacity. After ripping her life apart, after leaving her with nothing, here he was, asking for a handout. She could hear him breathing on the line, rushed, desperate. It's temporary. I've had some setbacks. You're doing well now, right? I just need a bridge. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. From power. The roles had reversed, the scales tipping so cleanly it almost felt scripted. For years she had been at his mercy. Now he was the one knocking at her door, and she held the key. She looked around her small office, the daisies on the desk, her children's artwork, the evidence of every sleepless night spent building instead of breaking. Claire pressed the phone closer, her voice steady, steel threaded through silk. You want me to rescue you? There was silence on the other end. Then a hollow laugh. You don't understand. If I go under, I'll lose everything. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Mark, I already did. The silence on the phone stretched so long, Claire could hear the faint ticking of the office clock, each second punctuating the absurdity of what Mark had just asked. This was the man who had looked her in the eyes and told her she would walk away with nothing. The man who paraded his mistress and new life online like trophies. And now, reduced and trembling, he was begging her for a lifeline. She closed her eyes and steadied her breath. The temptation to spit every wound back at him was fierce. But Claire had learned something in the trenches of survival. Rage was heavy, and she no longer carried what wasn't hers. When she finally spoke, her voice was even, deliberate. Mark, she said, when you left me with nothing, I built everything I have now with my own 2 hands. I raised our children. I worked until my eyes burned. I clawed my way back. And I did it without you. You taught me that I couldn't depend on anyone but myself. So no, I'm not your safety net. This is your mess, and you'll face it alone. The weight of her words filled the room. On the other end, she heard him inhale sharply, as if she had struck him harder than any fist could. For a moment he didn't reply. Then a muttered curse, bitter and small, before the line went dead. Claire lowered the phone and set it gently on the desk. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with release. She had faced him, not as the abandoned wife or the desperate mother, but as the woman she had become, whole, capable, untouchable. Within weeks, the collapse became public. Mark's business, once touted as unstoppable, buckled under debts he couldn't outrun. Creditors circled like vultures. His luxury car, the one he'd posed with under glowing street lamps, was repossessed in broad daylight. The house he had boasted about winning in the divorce hit the market. Its glossy photos online, a cruel reminder of how fragile empire can be. His mistress left soon after, unwilling to tie herself to a sinking ship. Rumors said she drained what little remained of his accounts before disappearing. Friends grew scarce. The cocktail party invitations dried up. Mark, once magnetic in every room, became a ghost haunting the same city he used to dominate. Claire didn't revel in it, at least not in the way she expected. The first time she saw his name mentioned in a news article about failed investments, she felt a brief sting of satisfaction, then an emptiness that surprised her. She realized she didn't need his downfall to validate her rise. She was already free. Her children noticed the change most. They no longer asked why Daddy didn't take them on trips or buy them toys. They saw the truth in small glimpses. Mark picking them up in a borrowed car, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, his smile tighter than before. Once her son whispered, "Mom, you're happier than Daddy now." Claire kissed his forehead and said softly, "Happiness isn't about what you own, sweetheart. It's about who you are." Still, Karma's strike was undeniable. It wasn't dramatic lightning from the sky. It was steady, relentless erosion. The same kind Mark had once inflicted on her returned in equal measure. Every boast he had made, every cruelty he had delivered, found its echo. One afternoon, as Claire walked out of her office carrying a box of newly printed business cards, shiny, professional, her name bold across the top, she spotted him across the street. Mark, shoulders hunched, speaking to someone in a tone that was more pleading than persuasive. He didn't notice her. For a moment she considered crossing, offering a polite nod, maybe even a word. But then she realized she owed him nothing. Not acknowledgement, not memory, not even anger. She turned away, the daisies on her desk waiting for water, her children waiting for dinner, her clients waiting for proofs. Her life was too full now to make space for ghosts. That night, she stood at the stove stirring pasta while her kids did homework at the table. Laughter bubbled up between them, filling the apartment with warmth that once felt impossible. Claire smiled to herself, the smell of garlic and basil drifting through the air. Mark had taken everything, but in losing it all, she had built something indestructible. Sunlight spilled through the office windows, painting the walls in gold. Claire stood by her desk, a mug of coffee warming her palms, and watched the city move below her. Delivery trucks beeped. People hurried with phones pressed to their ears. The florist downstairs propped open her door so the perfume of fresh roses drifted up. This was her world now, built from ashes. One late night and one hard decision at a time. Her children's laughter echoed from the lounge she'd added to the office. A corner with beanbags and art supplies where they could play after school. Their drawings still hung on the corkboard, now crowded with contracts and design proofs. The room was a patchwork of her past and present, the mother who refused to crumble, the designer who refused to quit, the woman who had learned she was stronger than the storm. People often asked if she was happy. Mark had lost everything. They expected a smirk, a gloating remark. But Claire always shook her head. "It's not about what happened to him," she would say gently. "It's about what I discovered in myself." Because the truth was, watching his empire collapse hadn't filled her with triumph. It had simply confirmed what she already knew. She didn't need revenge. She had already won. Her business was thriving now. Julia had become both mentor and friend, reminding her often of that first night at the mixer when Claire's voice had trembled and her confidence was paper-thin. "Look at you," Julia said recently, raising a glass at a celebratory dinner. "Clients waiting in line, staff who adore you, and a reputation built on your name. This," she waved her fork for emphasis, "this is justice." But Claire didn't see it as justice. She saw it as growth. She remembered every sleepless night, every bill she thought she couldn't pay, every time she looked at her children and wondered if she was enough. Those struggles had sculpted her into someone new, stronger, wiser, untouchable. One Saturday morning, while the kids slept in after a movie night, Claire sat at the kitchen table with her journal. She flipped through pages where she had once poured fear and doubt, ink smeared by tears, words shaky with despair. Now she wrote something different. "I am not defined by what was taken. I'm defined by what I created in its place." Later that day, she took her children to the park. They ran ahead, their sneakers kicking up dust, their laughter colliding with the sound of barking dogs and rustling leaves. Claire sat on a bench, her face tilted to the sun, and felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. Not the fragile peace of denial, but the deep kind that comes when you finally accept the past and choose not to carry it forward. She spotted Mark across the park once, standing alone by the concession stand. He looked smaller somehow, his once polished appearance dulled. For a heartbeat their eyes met. She braced herself for bitterness, for the old ache of betrayal. But what washed over her instead was surprising gratitude. Without him tearing her life apart, she never would have discovered how much strength lived inside her. Without his betrayal, she never would have built a business that was truly hers. Without his cruelty, she never would have shown her children what resilience looked like in motion. She nodded politely, nothing more. And in that simple gesture, she let go of everything he had been to her. That evening, tucking her kids into bed, her daughter asked softly, "Mom, are we going to be okay forever?" Claire smiled, smoothing the blanket around her. "We already are," she whispered, "because we have each other. And that's everything." As she turned out the light, Claire realized that the real victory wasn't Mark's downfall. It wasn't karma's strike. It was standing in the ruins of what he left behind and choosing to build something beautiful anyway. She had risen, not because he fell, but because she refused to stay down. And in that truth she found freedom.